This weekend is the Oscars ceremony, and as you will know if you have been watching my recent reviews, we have only one more Best Picture Oscar nominated film to review. This film I've been wanting to review for quite some time now. I saw it not too long after it came out in theaters, and I wasn't making movie reviews back then, so I obviously didn't review it then. But I absolutely loved this movie. I'm excited to talk about it now, and that movie is Get Out. Directed by Jordan Peele and starring Daniel Kaluuya, Allison Williams, Bradley Whitford, and many others. Get Out follows the story of Daniel Kaluuya's character of Chris, who is about to meet his white girlfriend's family for the very first time. While staying with his girlfriend's parents, things start out a little weird but manageable. But then, as time goes on and more things reveal themselves, shit really starts to hit the fan. And most of you watching this review probably already know what that shit hitting the fan is. And honestly, if you don't, what the hell are you doing? You gotta go see this movie, man. As is usual with my reviews, I'll start out by reviewing the performances. And geez, they are really good in this movie. Daniel Kaluuya is excellent in the lead role. His performance is extremely expressive. He's very expressive and very emotive, and I'm not gonna lie, the very first time I saw the movie, I went in not knowing that Daniel Kaluuya was British, and he totally pulls off the American accent. It's flawless. But like I said, that's not the only reason why his performance is good. He knows how to express anger, he knows how to express fear, he knows how to play somebody who is trying to be normal in a very abnormal situation. And that's why I was really excited that he got an Oscar nomination for Best Actor. While it was a little surprising because I thought that the Academy would just sweep over him, as I mentioned in my reaction video to the Oscar nominations, this is going to be really great for his career. The rest of the cast is very good as well. Allison Williams is excellent as his girlfriend, and there are certain parts of her performance that I'll get to later, but I really want to talk about Bradley Whitford right now, who plays her father. Bradley Whitford is very good at playing, I guess you could describe it as the overly sympathetic and apologetic, kind of deceptively apologetic white guy role. Almost like he's overtly trying to say, you know, I'm not racist, dude, I'm with ya. But he's doing it in such an over-the-top way, and he does it perfectly. And another person who I absolutely have to mention in the cast, who had me rolling on the floor laughing my ass off with some of the lines that he apparently ad-libbed, Lil Rel Howery. This guy steals every single scene he's in, and I can't wait to see what he does next. And moving away from the performances, I have to say, Jordan Peele proves in this film that he is a very good director. Everybody knows that Jordan Peele is famous for the sketch comedy series Key and Peele. And even though Get Out is not his directorial debut in general, it's his solo directing debut. And he does a phenomenal job. Get Out, while it is a horror thriller, I would describe as a real roller coaster of a film. Because not only does it have the horror thriller elements, but it also has the dramatic and the comedic elements. And Peele proves to be extremely adept at balancing all of these. And this leads me into another thing that I have to mention, is that Jordan Peele is an extremely good writer. One of the things that Peele did really well with creating Get Out's script and with directing the film is he was very good at weaving all of this symbolism about race relations into the story. And some of it is very in your face and pretty obvious, but some of it is so subtle. One that I will talk about that is pretty obvious, and it's something that I wouldn't really consider a spoiler because it's in the trailers, and pretty much anybody who hasn't even seen the film but has heard about it will know about this scene. The party scene, in which Daniel Kaluuya's character of Chris is pretty much the only black person there. And the other people at the party, while they aren't mean to him, say some really strange things, and it really alienates Chris, which I would imagine every black person in America, and probably in the world, has been to that party, or some other situation where they feel completely alienated because they feel like they're alone in the room. Which, you know, I personally can't speak to because, newsflash guys, I don't know if you can tell, but I'm white. I'm kidding, I'm obviously a pasty white guy. But anyway, I mean, it really does raise an interesting question of what is it like to be the one black person in a room. And not only is it like pertaining to a party, but it could be in any situation when you feel like you're alone. And while this scene is great and it's a great piece of symbolism, there are tons of other little things sprinkled throughout the film that are really great subtle pieces of symbolism. Now, it's at this point in the review where I will have to get into spoiler territory, which, again, I will say, if you have not seen the film, see it now. This is an excellent film. Toward the end of the film, when the cops show up, or what you think are the cops showing up, the first thing Chris does is stand up and put his hands above his head. He puts his hands up. With police brutality cases in the past, and the targeting of black people by police, he knows that you pretty much have to put your hands up, but that's not necessarily going to save you. And there's toward the beginning of the film when Chris and Rose end up hitting the deer on the road, and they end up calling the police. Even though Rose was the one driving, the police officer asks to see Chris's license. Again, another reference of cops targeting black people. The big reveal at the end of the film is that Rose is not dating Chris because she wants to date Chris. Rose is dating Chris as part of a family scheme that has been going on for quite some time, in which they abduct black people and auction them off, and whoever ends up buying the person she's dating, and by the way, that's a reference to slavery, whoever ends up buying this person is usually buying them because they know their body is failing in some way. It turns out that Rose's family has perfected a procedure that allows this person to essentially take over the body of the person they bought. And while the person they bought is still technically alive and can see everything, they're basically just a passenger. They are not able to do anything at all. And Jordan Peele has said that this is a way of depicting how black people are marginalized by society. They feel like all the control belongs to everybody else, but that they're marginalized and kind of left behind by the system. And even though the big reveal is genuinely shocking when you first see it, it's one of those things that makes you want to watch the film multiple times over, because there are subtle hints in the film that point to this. Let's go back to the scene in which Chris was asked for his license even though he wasn't driving the car. Rose asks the officer, why do you need to see his license if he wasn't the one driving? When you first see this, you think, okay, she's defending her boyfriend. But it turns out she's not defending her boyfriend because she wants to defend her boyfriend. She's trying to get the cop to not run his license so that she can avoid having a paper trail. Another thing that I have to single out here is Allison Williams' performance as Rose, because there are subtleties in her performance that you can watch over and over again and realize, you know, when I first watched this movie, I thought she was just being the doting girlfriend character, but upon watching a little bit more, all of her smiles toward him are just a little bit creepy. Some of the things she says kind of have dual meanings here. She's giving away hints that you don't catch on to when you first watch the movie. And they were hidden in plain sight, but they're so subtle that you don't notice them until you actually know what the big reveal is. And this is just one of the many things that makes this a very smart and intelligently put together movie. Even if you don't agree with what the movie is trying to say, which I will get into what I think about that in a minute, even if you don't agree with what it says, you have to admit it's unbelievably well put together. Jordan Peele has said that this movie is going to be the first in a trilogy he's making, and I can't wait to see what he does next. Now, after seeing the film, a lot of people asked me, Steve, what do you think about the film's message? Do you think there is still racism in America? And do you think that black people are marginalized, or that other minorities are marginalized by society in general? And is there systematic racism? My short answer, yes, I do. But let me explain a little bit, and this is going to admittedly be a little long and drawn out. For the first 26 years of my life, I lived in a city called Joliet. And for those of you who don't know, Joliet is a southwest suburb of Chicago, and it's such a big city. I think it's the third or fourth biggest city in Illinois. But anyway, Joliet is, and has been for a very long time, a very racially and ethnically diverse city. The neighborhood I lived in my entire life was predominantly Hispanic and Latino, but there were also a lot of black people who lived there, and there were also some white people who lived there, including me and my family. And overall, I think that growing up in a very racially diverse community was very good for me, because it showed me that just because you are a certain race does not mean you'll fit a certain stereotype. And usually, you don't fit a certain stereotype. People aren't stereotypes. People are people. A few years ago, I ended up meeting somebody who lived in a small rural town. The town that this person lived in was 99% white. And by the way, just to let you know, I'm not pulling the demographics that I just gave out of my ass. I actually looked up those demographics not too long ago. Now, I will say this, these people were not bad people. They were not mean people. But there was a day when we went to a restaurant in a place not too far away, so pretty similar demographics. And I don't remember how the conversation started, but the person who I was with said something about Mexican people that was very derogatory. And I was honestly shocked by this statement. The first thing that shocked me was that it was obviously just a generalization that obviously wasn't true, and I'd say it was a very stupid assumption to make about any group of people. Number two, when I said, I've never heard that stereotype before, everybody at the table looked at me like I was crazy. Like it was a stereotype that everybody knew, supposedly, about Mexican people, which obviously I'm not saying that any stereotype is true about Mexican people, or any people for that matter. I'm just saying that people have ideas of what racial stereotypes are, and this one I had never heard of before. And when I went back home, and I'm not just talking about people who are in my family, I'm talking about I actually talked to a bunch of different people about this and asked, hey, is this something people actually think? And they'd never heard that either. So it was obviously something that they had either just made up themselves or had heard from somebody else and just believed it. In short, it was total bullshit. But the thing that shocked me the most is that I was the only person who seemed to be kind of taken aback by the comment. I was the only person who was a little bit uncomfortable that people around me were saying things like this about people they didn't even know, and people that just happened to be a different skin color than they were. And there was another interaction that I had. Again, I don't even remember exactly how the conversation came up. It had to do with something that was going on in the news, and somebody brought up the usage of the N-word. I said something like, well, you shouldn't say that because it's a pretty mean thing to say to somebody. And the person said something along the lines of, and again, I'm paraphrasing here, but they said something along the lines of, well, if black people didn't always change what they wanted to be called, and I'm just thinking to myself, when did they ever want to be called the N-word? And again, it was one of those things where no one else was really kind of taken aback by what the person said, other than me. And again, the people who were saying this stuff weren't bad people. They just had very skewed viewpoints that I don't understand. And again, I think this is chalked up to the fact that I actually grew up around a lot of black people and Latino people and white people, a very diverse area where I learned, hey, people aren't stereotypes. Don't treat them as such. I also learned a lot of people are not exposed to this. A lot of people's viewpoints are skewed because they're never exposed to this stuff. They don't educate themselves on this stuff because they never got the opportunity or never wanted to. And I honestly have to say this too, people who don't agree with me on what I'm saying here, don't call me a snowflake, because if you do, I'm not going to be able to take you seriously. To me, that's just another buzzword, and it's one of those words where I hear it and I think, okay, this person has the intellectual capabilities of a rodent. Unless they're saying it ironically in a way that makes fun of people who say the word snowflake as an insult. If they say it seriously as an insult, then I can't take them seriously. But anyway, in terms of racism and my thoughts on racism today in America, I'll leave us at this. Even though it has been a very long time in our course of history since slavery ended, and since the Jim Crow laws ended, in the grand scheme of human history, it hasn't been that long since they ended. And I think there are certain remnants of it that still exist, whether it's on an individual level, which that's irrefutable. That stuff definitely still exists on an individual level. And I honestly think, because of things going on today, leads me to believe that there is a little bit of a remnant, at least, of systematic racism still there. While I don't think it'll happen, I would love to see a day when racism is gone. And even though, like I said, I don't think that'll ever happen, I would like to see us getting closer and closer to that coming. Alright guys, that's it for my review of Get Out. And that is my final Best Picture Oscar-nominated film review for 2018. But that does not mean I'm going to stop making reviews. I'm going to review more films. Alright guys, have a good night.